Elena Martinez had always known her 19th birthday would change everything, but she never imagined it would seal her fate to a creature of darkness. The morning sun filtered through her bedroom window in the small village of San Miguel, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with an ominous warning. Her mother, Maria, had been unusually quiet during breakfast, her weathered hands trembling as she set down the ceramic coffee cup. "Mija," Maria whispered, unable to meet her daughter's questioning gaze. "There are things about our family that you must know." Elena's father, Carlos, emerged from the back room carrying an ornate wooden box she had never seen before. His face bore the weight of years of hidden secrets, and his usually bright eyes were clouded with regret. The box itself seemed ancient, carved with symbols that made Elena's skin crawl just looking at them. "Our bloodline carries a debt," Carlos began, his voice heavy with sorrow. "One that has been passed down for 7 generations. Your great-great-great-great-grandmother made a pact with the vampire clans during the War of 1847. She traded her family's freedom for the protection of our village." Elena's hands began to shake. "What kind of pact?" "Every 7th generation, the firstborn daughter must marry into the Drackle family," Maria said through her tears. "Today, you become the bride of King Adrian Drackle." The world seemed to tilt beneath Elena's feet. Vampires were real. Her family had hidden this truth from her for 19 years. And now she was expected to marry their king, a creature who had lived for centuries and commanded legions of the undead. "This is insane," Elena gasped, backing away from her parents. "Vampires don't exist. This has to be some kind of joke." Before her parents could respond, a chill filled the air that made Elena's breath visible. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that frost began forming on the windows. Outside, the bright morning sun seemed to dim, as if something was blocking its rays. A knock echoed through the house. 3 slow, deliberate raps that seemed to vibrate through Elena's very bones. "He's here," Carlos whispered, and Elena could see genuine terror in his eyes. Maria rushed to Elena's side, pressing a small silver cross into her palm. "This was your grandmother's. It won't protect you from him, but it might give you strength." The front door opened without anyone approaching it. Elena watched in horror as shadows began pouring into the house like thick, black smoke. From within those shadows stepped 3 figures dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light itself. The first was a woman with platinum blonde hair and eyes like ice chips. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and, when she smiled, Elena caught a glimpse of fangs. "I am Isabel Blackwood," she said in an accent that sounded centuries old. "I serve as advisor to His Majesty." The second figure was a massive man with shoulders that nearly filled the doorway. His presence alone made Elena feel small and vulnerable. "Victor Reeves," he introduced himself with a voice like grinding stone. "Captain of the Royal Guard." But it was the third figure that made Elena's heart stop completely. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with black hair that seemed to absorb the light around it and pale skin that looked like marble. His eyes were the most unsettling shade of amber she had ever seen, ancient and knowing, as if they had witnessed centuries of human history. He wore a long black coat that moved around him like liquid shadow. "Miss Martinez," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle, like velvet over steel. "I am Adrian Drackle. I believe we have business to discuss." Elena found herself unable to look away from his eyes. There was something hypnotic about them, something that made her feel as though he could see directly into her soul. But there was also something else, something she hadn't expected. Pain. Deep, endless pain that seemed to echo through centuries. "I won't go with you," Elena managed to say, though her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Adrian stepped closer, and Elena caught his scent. She had expected something horrific, something that smelled of death and decay. Instead, he smelled like winter forests and old books, leather and something mysteriously masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her terror. "I understand your fear," Adrian said softly. "But the pact cannot be broken. Your family's debt must be paid. However, I give you my word that you will not be harmed. You have my protection, now and always." "Protection from what?" Elena demanded. "From you?" Something dark flashed across Adrian's features. From things far worse than me, I assure you. Isabel stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a wedding dress made of the finest silk Elena had ever seen. It was deep burgundy, almost black, with intricate silver embroidery that seemed to shimmer with its own light. The ceremony must take place before sunset, she announced. The blood moon rises tonight, and such things cannot wait. Elena looked at her parents, hoping for some sign that they would fight for her, that they would refuse to let this happen. Instead, she saw only resignation and fear. They had known this day would come. They had prepared for it her entire life. Do I have any choice in this? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Adrian's expression softened slightly. The pact is binding. But, I can offer you this choice. You may have 1 hour to say goodbye to your family and prepare yourself. I will not force you to leave immediately. It wasn't much, but it was something. Elena nodded, unable to trust her voice. 1 hour, Victor rumbled. Then, we returned to the castle. As quickly as they had arrived, the 3 vampires dissolved back into shadows and were gone. Elena collapsed into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her weight. How could you not tell me? She whispered to her parents. We hoped, Maria said through her tears. We hoped that somehow the pact would be forgotten, that he wouldn't come for you. But, we should have known better, Carlos added. The Drackle family never forgets a debt. Elena spent the next hour in a daze. Her mother helped her into the burgundy wedding dress, which fit her perfectly despite never being measured for it. The fabric felt strange against her skin, both incredibly soft and, somehow alive, as if it were responding to her body temperature. Tell me about him, Elena said as Maria brushed her long dark hair. Tell me about the Vampire King. Maria's hands stilled. The stories say he was turned over 800 years ago. He was once human, a warrior prince who was betrayed by someone he trusted. They say he's ruled the vampire clans with both justice and ruthlessness ever since. Has he had other wives? No, Carlos answered from the doorway. You would be his first. The pact specifically called for a virgin bride from our bloodline. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Of course. She had always been somewhat old-fashioned, focusing on her studies rather than dating. Now the choice was being used to fulfill some ancient contract she had never agreed to. The hour passed far too quickly. When the shadows began to gather again, Elena kissed her parents goodbye, uncertain if she would ever see them again. Her mother pressed a small bag into her hands. Some of your things, Maria whispered. And letters from us, for when you're feeling alone. The 3 vampires materialized once more, and, this time Adrian extended his hand to Elena. She stared at it for a long moment, noting how pale his skin was, how his fingers were longer and more elegant than any human's should be. Are you ready? He asked. Elena took a deep breath and placed her hand in his. His skin was cool but not unpleasantly so, and his grip was gentle despite the obvious strength in his fingers. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied. The world around them began to blur and shift. Elena felt as though she were falling through space, though Adrian's hand kept her anchored. Colors swirled around them in impossible patterns, and she could hear the sound of wind rushing past her ears even though there was no wind. When everything finally stopped spinning, Elena found herself standing in front of a massive Gothic castle that looked like something from a dark fairy tale. Tall spires reached toward the cloudy sky, and gargoyles perched on every corner, their stone eyes seeming to track her movement. The castle was surrounded by a forest so thick and dark that no sunlight penetrated its canopy. Welcome to Castle Drackle, Adrian said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been pride. Your new home. Elena stared up at the imposing structure, trying to process that this was where she would spend the rest of her life. However long that might be, considering she was now married to an immortal being. How long do I have to live? She asked suddenly. Adrian looked at her with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, will you kill me? Turn me? What exactly does this marriage entail? For the first time since she had met him, Adrian almost smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and, somehow, more human. The pact requires marriage, nothing more. You will live as long as any human would. Unless. Unless what? Unless you choose otherwise. Before Elena could ask what that meant, the massive castle doors swung open, revealing a great hall lit by hundreds of candles. Vampires lined both sides of the hall, all dressed in formal attire, all watching Elena with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hunger. At the far end of the hall stood an altar, and, beside it waited a man in elaborate religious robes. His face was pale and gaunt, and his eyes held the same amber glow as Adrian's. Father Cornelius will perform the ceremony, Adrian explained as they walked down the aisle between the assembled vampires. He has been with our family for 400 years. Elena's legs felt like they might give out at any moment. She was about to marry a vampire king in front of an audience of creatures that could kill her without breaking a sweat. The burgundy dress felt heavier with each step, as if it were made of lead rather than silk. When they reached the altar, Father Cornelius began speaking in a language Elena didn't recognize. Latin, perhaps, or something even older. Adrian translated softly in her ear. He's asking if there are any objections to this union. The hall remained silent except for the sound of Elena's own rapid heartbeat. Now he's asking for our vows, Adrian continued. I'll go first. Adrian turned to face Elena, taking both of her hands in his. His amber eyes seemed to glow brighter in the candlelight, and, when he spoke, his voice carried throughout the entire hall. Elena Martinez, he began, I swear to you before my subjects and, before the ancient powers that govern our kind, I will protect you with my life. I will honor you as my queen. I will never harm you, and I will never force you to become something you are not. This I swear on the blood of my ancestors. Elena realized that everyone was waiting for her to respond. She had no idea what she was supposed to say. Father Cornelius leaned forward and whispered something in her ear. Repeat after me, he said. I accept your protection and your crown, and I swear to rule beside you with wisdom and compassion. Elena's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, but, in the supernatural silence of the hall, every word was audible. I accept your protection and your crown, and I swear to rule beside you with wisdom and compassion. Father Cornelius produced 2 rings from somewhere within his robes. They were unlike anything Elena had ever seen, carved from what looked like black stone but felt warm to the touch. Strange symbols were etched around the bands, symbols that seemed to shift and move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Adrian slipped one onto Elena's finger, and she was surprised by how perfectly it fit. She fumbled slightly as she placed the matching ring on his finger, noting how his skin seemed to warm slightly under her touch. By the ancient laws and the power of the blood moon, Father Cornelius intoned, I pronounce you husband and wife, king and queen of the vampire realm. The assembled vampires erupted into what could only be described as a cheer, though it sounded more like the howling of wolves than human celebration. Elena felt overwhelmed by the noise and the weight of what had just happened. She was married. To a vampire. She was now queen of creatures she hadn't believed existed that morning. Adrian leaned down and whispered in her ear. The traditional kiss, he said. But only if you're willing. Elena looked up into his ancient eyes and saw something she hadn't expected, patience. He was giving her a choice, even in this small thing. She nodded slightly. His lips were softer than she had anticipated, and the kiss was gentle, almost reverent. It lasted only a moment, but Elena felt something shift inside her, some connection forming that she didn't understand. When they broke apart, Adrian smiled that almost human smile again. Thank you, he said softly, so quietly that only she could hear. For what? For giving this a chance. As the celebration continued around them, Elena realized that perhaps she had been wrong about at least one thing. Adrian Drackle might be a vampire king, but he was not the monster she had expected him to be. And that realization was somehow more terrifying than anything else that had happened that day. The celebration moved from the great hall to an even more magnificent ballroom that Elena hadn't known existed. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with elaborate murals depicting scenes from vampire history. The walls were lined with portraits of previous Draco rulers, their painted eyes seeming to follow Elena as she moved through the room. Tables groaned under the weight of elaborate feast preparations, though Elena noticed that much of the food appeared untouched by most of the guests. Instead, she observed servants moving through the crowd carrying silver goblets filled with dark liquid that caught the light like liquid rubies. "Wine," Adrian said, appearing at her side as if he had read her thoughts. "Very old wine." Elena wasn't entirely convinced it was wine, but she decided not to ask for clarification. There were some things she wasn't ready to know yet. "Your Majesty," Isabel approached them, moving with that same predatory grace Elena had noticed earlier. "The gift presentation should begin soon. The court is eager to witness tradition." "Of course," Adrian nodded, then turned to Elena. "There is a custom among our people. Wedding gifts are presented publicly, and they often reveal much about the giver's intentions and the marriage's expected future." Elena felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "What kind of gifts?" "You'll see," Adrian said, but there was something in his expression that suggested even he might be uncertain about what was coming. Victor stepped forward, his massive frame cutting an imposing figure even among the vampires. In his hands he carried a wooden chest that looked ancient enough to have been crafted before Elena's country was even discovered. From the royal guard, Victor announced in his rumbling voice, "We present weapons forged in the old ways. Silver-laced steel that can cut through any supernatural threat. For a queen must be able to protect herself and her subjects." Elena stared at the gleaming daggers and swords nestled in velvet within the chest. They were beautiful in a deadly way, their blades seeming to glow with inner light. But the message was clear: she would need to learn to fight. Next came Lady Catherine Nightshade, an elegant vampire with silver hair who looked to be in her 40s but whose eyes held centuries of experience. "From the court of ladies," she announced, "we present the knowledge of ages." Her gift was a collection of leather-bound books, their pages yellowed with time. Elena caught glimpses of titles in various languages: the politics of immortal courts, supernatural diplomacy, the history of vampire law. "These will help you understand your new world," Lady Catherine explained with a kind smile. "Knowledge is perhaps the most valuable weapon a queen can possess." More gifts followed. Ancient jewelry that hummed with magical energy. Tapestries woven with protective spells. A mirror that supposedly showed truth rather than mere reflection. Each gift came with elaborate speeches about duty, power, and the responsibilities of royalty. Elena accepted each present graciously, though her mind was reeling with the implications. These vampires expected her to become a real queen, not just a figurehead. They expected her to learn their ways, to protect their people, to make decisions that could affect immortal beings who had lived for centuries. As the gift-giving continued, Elena noticed that Adrian had grown increasingly tense. He stood perfectly still, but she could see the way his jaw clenched slightly, the way his eyes scanned the crowd as if looking for something specific. Finally, the formal presentations ended, and Elena thought she could relax. Then, she noticed the crowd parting to make way for a figure she hadn't seen before. The vampire who approached them was different from the others. Where most of the court maintained an appearance of elegant civilization, this one looked wild, dangerous. His black hair was long and unkempt, his clothes were leather rather than silk, and, when he smiled, his fangs were prominently displayed. "Marcus Bloodworth," Adrian said quietly, and Elena heard a warning in his voice. "Your Majesty," Marcus said with a bow that somehow managed to be both respectful and mocking. "I would not dream of missing such a momentous occasion." "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Adrian asked directly. "Why, I've come to present my wedding gift, of course," Marcus replied, his smile growing wider and more predatory. "Surely you wouldn't deny me the honor?" Elena looked between the two vampires and realized she was witnessing some kind of power play. The entire ballroom had grown silent, and she could feel tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. "Very well," Adrian said finally. "Present your gift." Marcus reached into his leather coat and withdrew a small wooden box, no larger than Elena's palm. It looked ordinary, even shabby compared to the elaborate presentations that had come before. "For the new queen," Marcus announced loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, "I present a gift of truth." He handed the box to Elena, and, the moment her fingers touched it, she felt something strange. It was warm, almost hot, and it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "What is it?" Elena asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Open it," Marcus said, his eyes glittering with malicious amusement. Elena looked at Adrian, who had grown very still. His face was pale even by vampire standards, and she could see genuine fear in his eyes. "Elena," he said softly, "you don't have to open it." "But she should," Marcus interrupted. "A queen should know the truth about her subjects, don't you think? She should know exactly what kind of creatures she's chosen to rule over." The challenge in his words was clear. Elena realized that this was some kind of test, that whatever was in the box would determine how the vampire court saw her. If she refused to open it, she would be seen as weak, unable to handle the reality of her new world. Elena took a deep breath and opened the box. Inside was a single glass vial filled with dark red liquid. But this wasn't the refined wine she had seen being served at the celebration. This looked thick, viscous, and, when she tilted the vial, it clung to the glass in a way that made her stomach turn. "Human blood," Marcus announced with obvious satisfaction. "Fresh from this morning's hunt." Elena felt the color drain from her face. She looked around the ballroom and realized that every vampire there was watching her reaction. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few appeared to be enjoying her discomfort. "This is what we are," Marcus continued, his voice carrying throughout the silent ballroom. "This is what sustains us. This is the truth your husband has been too gentle to share with you." Elena's hands began to shake, causing the vial to rattle against the wooden box. She thought she might be sick. "Marcus," Adrian's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "That's enough." "Is it?" Marcus challenged. "She's our queen now. Shouldn't she understand what that means? Shouldn't she know that every one of her subjects is a predator who has killed to survive?" Elena looked up at Adrian, searching his face for some denial, some explanation that would make this less horrific. Instead, she saw only pain and regret. "It's true," Adrian said quietly. "We are what we are. I cannot change that." The vial slipped from Elena's numb fingers and shattered on the stone floor. The blood spread in a dark puddle at her feet, and the smell that rose from it was metallic and, somehow, alive. "Whose blood is this?" Elena whispered. Marcus's smile turned cruel. "Does it matter? Human blood is human blood. Though if you must know, it came from a young man about your age. He was walking alone after dark. Really, it was almost too easy." Elena felt something break inside her. The horror of what she had married into crashed over her like a wave. These creatures killed innocent people. They hunted humans like animals. And now she was supposed to rule over them? "You're monsters," she whispered, backing away from the puddle of blood. "Yes," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "We are. And now you're our queen." Elena turned and ran. She pushed through the crowd of vampires, ignoring their startled expressions and murmured comments. She needed to get away, needed air, needed space to think about what she had gotten herself into. The castle corridors seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Elena ran blindly, her burgundy wedding dress trailing behind her, until she found herself in what appeared to be a library. Tall shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with books that looked older than civilization itself. She collapsed into a chair, finally, allowing the tears she had been holding back to fall. What had her family gotten her into? How could they have known about this and still let it happen? "I thought I might find you here." Elena looked up to see Adrian standing in the doorway. He had removed his formal coat, and his white shirt was partly unbuttoned, making him look younger and less intimidating. "Don't," Elena said, wiping her eyes. "Don't try to explain this away." "I'm not going to," Adrian said, stepping into the library but keeping his distance. Marcus was cruel in his presentation, but he wasn't wrong. "We are what we are. You kill people. We do." His honesty was somehow worse than any lie would have been. Elena had expected him to deny it, to explain that vampires had evolved past such things, that they had found alternatives. "How many?" she asked. "How many what? How many people have you killed?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing his answer. "More than I can count," he said finally. "I have lived for 8 centuries. In that time, I have killed to feed, killed to protect my people, killed in wars, and killed those who threaten innocent humans." "Innocent humans?" Elena laughed bitterly. "But, you kill innocent humans." "Yes," Adrian said simply. "The nature of what we are requires it. We need blood to survive. Without it, we die." Elena stood up and began pacing around the library, her mind racing. "There has to be another way. What about blood banks? What about volunteers? What about animals?" "Animal blood can sustain us for a while, but it weakens us significantly. We become vulnerable to our enemies, unable to protect our territories or our people." "And the other options?" Adrian was quiet again, and Elena could see conflict playing across his features. "Blood banks exist in the modern world, yes. And there are humans who offer their blood willingly, usually in exchange for payment or protection. Then, why not use those?" "Because old habits die hard among immortal beings," Adrian said with bitter honesty. "And because some of my subjects, like Marcus, believe that hunting makes us stronger, more connected to our true nature." Elena stopped pacing and stared at him. "You don't agree with that?" It wasn't a question, and Adrian seemed surprised that she had seen through to that truth. "No," he said quietly. "I don't. I stopped hunting innocent humans decades ago. I haven't taken a life for food in nearly 50 years. Then, how do you survive?" "Volunteers. People who understand what we are and choose to help us anyway. I pay them well, I ensure their safety, and I never take more than they can safely give." Elena felt some of the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Because I wanted you to understand the full truth of what you were marrying into. Most of my subjects still hunt. Most of them see it as their right, their nature. If you are to be their queen, you need to know exactly what that means." Elena sank back into the chair, processing this information. "So some vampires have found alternatives, but most haven't." "Correct. And Marcus brought that blood specifically to shock me." "Marcus brought that blood to test you," Adrian corrected. "He wanted to see if you would faint, run away, or demand to be returned to your human life immediately." "What would have happened if I had done any of those things?" Adrian's expression darkened. "There are factions among the vampire courts who believe humans are only good for food and servitude. They oppose the idea of a human queen. If you had shown weakness tonight, it would have given them ammunition to challenge your right to rule." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the castle's stone walls. "They're looking for an excuse to get rid of me." "Some are, yes." "And what about you?" Elena asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Do you want a human queen, or were you just fulfilling an obligation?" Adrian was quiet for so long that Elena began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I have been alone for 800 years, he said. "I have watched human civilizations rise and fall. I have seen the best and worst of both humans and vampires. When I learned about the pact your family made, I could have found a way around it. There are always loopholes in such agreements if one looks hard enough. But you didn't." "No." "Because I was curious about the woman who would willingly marry a monster to honor her family's debt." "I wasn't willing," Elena pointed out. "I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice tonight," Adrian said. "When Marcus handed you that box, you could have refused to open it. When you saw what was inside, you could have demanded to be taken home immediately. When I told you the truth about what we are, you could have run from this room and never stopped running." Elena considered this. "But I didn't." "No. You asked questions. You looked for alternatives. You showed strength instead of fear. I was terrified. Fear and strength are not mutually exclusive, Adrian said with what might have been admiration. The bravest people are often the most afraid. Elena stood up again, this time moving closer to where Adrian stood. In the softer lighting of the library, he looked less like an ancient predator and more like a man who had carried the weight of difficult decisions for far too long. If I stay, Elena said carefully, if I really try to be queen of the vampires, what would that mean? It would mean learning to navigate court politics that are far more complex and dangerous than anything in human society. It would mean making decisions that could affect thousands of immortal beings. It would mean standing up to vampires like Marcus who believe humans are inferior. And it would mean accepting that my subjects kill innocent people to survive. For now, yes. But, perhaps. Adrian paused, and Elena could see him considering his words carefully. Perhaps a human queen could help guide our people toward better alternatives. Elena felt something click into place in her mind. You want me to help change vampire society? I want you to be yourself, Adrian said. You have already shown more courage and compassion in one night than most vampires develop in centuries. If you choose to stay, if you choose to rule beside me, you could help our people become something better than what we have been. Elena walked to one of the tall windows and looked out at the dark forest surrounding the castle. Somewhere out there were vampires who hunted humans for sport. But, here, in this room, was a vampire king who had chosen a different path and was offering her the chance to walk it with him. What happens now? Elena asked. Now you decide, Adrian said. The choice is entirely yours. I will not hold you to a pact you never agreed to. If you want to leave, I will ensure you are returned safely to your family, and I will see that you are protected for the rest of your natural life. Elena turned to face him. And, if I stay? If you stay, we begin the real work of ruling together. We face the challenges of our court, we deal with vampires like Marcus who will test your authority at every turn, and we try to build something better than what came before. Elena thought about her parents, about the small village where she had grown up, about the simple human life she was giving up. Then, she thought about the library full of knowledge, about the vampires who had presented gifts to help her succeed, about the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. I need to know something first, Elena said. Anything. That kiss, during the ceremony. Did you feel anything? Adrian's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected question. Yes, he said after a moment. I felt something I haven't felt in centuries. What? Hope. Elena made her decision. Elena took Adrian's hand, surprised again by how warm his skin felt despite his vampire nature. I'm staying, she said firmly. But, we're going to do this my way. Adrian's eyes brightened with something that looked like relief. What do you mean? I mean that if I'm going to be queen of the vampires, then we're going to start making some changes around here. Beginning with the hunting. Before Adrian could respond, Victor appeared in the library doorway, his massive frame filling the entrance. Your Majesties, he said urgently, forgive the interruption, but there's something you need to see. Elena and Adrian exchanged glances. What is it? Adrian asked. Marcus has gathered a group of supporters in the main courtyard. They're making demands. Elena felt her stomach drop. What kind of demands? They want proof that the human queen is fit to rule vampires, Victor said grimly. Marcus is calling for a trial by combat. Adrian's expression darkened. He cannot challenge Elena directly. She's under my protection. He's not challenging her, Victor said. He's challenging your right to choose a human bride without consulting the full vampire council. Elena didn't fully understand the politics involved, but she could see from Adrian's face that this was serious. What does that mean? It means, Adrian said slowly, that Marcus is essentially challenging my authority as king. If he wins the trial by combat, he can demand that our marriage be annulled and that you be sent back to your family. And, if you win? Then, Marcus and his supporters must accept you as their queen without further challenge. Elena felt anger rising in her chest.
So my entire future depends on a fight between two vampires?
It's more complicated than that, Adrian said. In vampire society, trial by combat is one of the oldest ways to settle disputes about succession and royal authority.
It's not just about physical strength.
It's about proving who has the stronger claim to leadership. That's ridiculous, Elena said flatly.
I didn't agree to be anyone's prize in some supernatural gladiator match.
Victor cleared his throat.
Your Majesty, there is another option.
Both Elena and Adrian turned to look at him.
What option? Adrian asked.
The challenged party can name a champion to fight in their place, Victor said carefully. If Queen Elena were to name her own champion, she could prove her worthiness to rule by the strength of those willing to fight for her.
Elena's mind raced. So instead of Adrian fighting to defend his choice of bride, I could have someone fight to defend my right to be here?
Exactly, Victor said. It would be a more powerful statement. It would show that you have earned loyalty rather than simply inherited it through marriage.
Elena looked at Adrian. What do you think?
I think it's dangerous, Adrian said honestly. If your champion loses, the consequences would be the same as if I lost fighting for myself.
But, if my champion wins?
Then, you would be seen as a true queen in your own right, not just the human wife of the vampire king. Elena felt something shift inside her, some core of strength she hadn't known she possessed. This was her chance to prove that she belonged here, that she was more than just a pawn in some ancient pact. I'll do it, she said.
I'll name a champion.
Elena, Adrian said carefully, choosing a champion is not a decision to make lightly. You need someone skilled enough to defeat Marcus in single combat, but also someone whose loyalty to you is absolute. If your champion betrays you or loses due to lack of commitment, you could lose more than just the trial.
Who would you recommend? Elena asked. Before Adrian could answer, Victor stepped forward. Your Majesty, if you would accept, I would be honored to serve as your champion.
Elena stared at the massive vampire captain. She barely knew him, yet he was offering to risk his life to defend her right to rule.
Why? Elena asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything.
Victor's stern expression softened slightly. Your Majesty, I have served the crown for 3 centuries. I have seen weak rulers and strong ones, wise ones and foolish ones. In the past hour, you have shown more courage and wisdom than most vampires develop in decades.
But, I'm human.
Yes, Victor said simply.
And, that may be exactly what our people need.
Elena felt moved by his faith in her, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. If she accepted Victor as her champion and he lost, would his death be on her conscience?
There's something else, Adrian said quietly. Something you should know before you make this decision. Elena looked at him. What? Marcus isn't just challenging your right to be queen.
He's positioning himself to take over if I'm removed from power. He represents the old ways, the vampires who believe we should rule through fear and treat humans as nothing more than food.
So this isn't really about me at all, Elena realized. This is about what kind of society the vampires want to be. Exactly.
Your choice of champion, and the outcome of this trial, will determine the future direction of our entire civilization. Elena felt the enormity of the situation settling on her shoulders. She was 19 years old, had been married to a vampire for less than a day, and now the future of supernatural society rested on her decisions.
How long do I have to decide? Elena asked.
The trial must take place within the hour, Victor said.
Vampire law requires that challenges be answered quickly.
Elena closed her eyes and tried to think clearly. She could choose Victor, who had experience and loyalty but whom she barely knew.
She could try to convince Adrian to fight after all, though that would undermine her own authority. Or,
I have an idea, Elena said suddenly.
But, it's crazy.
Adrian and Victor both looked at her expectantly.
What if I don't choose just one champion? Elena said. What if I choose multiple champions to represent different aspects of what I want vampire society to become?
I'm not sure I understand, Adrian said.
You said this trial is about proving my worthiness to rule, right? What if I prove it by showing that I can inspire loyalty not just from warriors like Victor, but from vampires who represent different parts of your society? Elena's mind was racing as the idea developed. What if I chose champions to represent the values I want to bring to the vampire court? Someone who represents strength, like Victor. Someone who represents wisdom, like Lady Catherine.
Someone who represents the possibility of change. That's not how trials by combat work, Victor said, though he sounded intrigued rather than dismissive. Then, maybe it's time to change how they work, Elena said.
I'm supposed to be bringing something new to vampire society, right? Let me start by showing that strength comes in many forms. Adrian was staring at her with something that might have been amazement. You want to challenge the fundamental structure of the trial itself.
I want to challenge the fundamental structure of vampire society, Elena corrected.
Starting with the idea that might makes right. Before anyone could respond, Isabel appeared in the library doorway.
Your Majesties, she said urgently, Marcus is demanding an answer. The court is assembled in the courtyard, and they're growing impatient.
Elena took a deep breath. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. After Isabel left, Elena turned to Adrian.
I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest.
Of course. Do you really want me to stay because you think I can help change vampire society? Or do you want me to stay because you're lonely? Adrian was quiet for a long moment.
When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it.
Both, he said.
I have been alone for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to share decisions with. But, watching you tonight, seeing how you think, how you question things that my people have accepted for centuries, I believe you could help us become better than what we are.
Even if it means changing traditions that are hundreds of years old? Especially if it means that. Elena nodded.
Then, let's go change some traditions. The courtyard was filled with vampires when Elena and Adrian emerged from the castle. Torches lined the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that made the assembled crowd look even more otherworldly than usual. Marcus stood in the center of the space, no longer wearing his leather jacket but dressed in what appeared to be formal combat attire.
Your Majesty, Marcus called out when he saw Elena. Have you chosen your champion? Elena stepped forward, surprised by how calm she felt. I have. And who will fight for your right to rule over creatures of the night?
I will fight for myself. The courtyard erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus looked genuinely surprised, and Elena could see several vampires exchanging glances of disbelief. A human cannot challenge a vampire to single combat, Marcus said. You would be killed within seconds.
You're right, Elena agreed. Which is why I'm not challenging you to single combat. Then, what are you proposing?
Elena took another step forward, making sure her voice would carry to every corner of the courtyard.
I'm proposing that we settle this dispute the way humans do. With a test of leadership, not a test of violence. What kind of test? Marcus demanded, though Elena could see curiosity in his eyes along with the anger. A simple one, Elena said. We each present our vision for vampire society to the court.
Then, the vampires themselves decide who they want to follow. The courtyard fell completely silent.
Elena could feel hundreds of ancient eyes staring at her, weighing her words. You want to put it to a vote? Marcus asked incredulously.
I want to put it to a choice, Elena corrected. Every vampire here is intelligent, experienced, and capable of making decisions about their own future.
Why shouldn't they have a say in who rules them?
Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to contempt.
Because vampires follow strength, not popularity contests. Do they? Elena asked, turning to address the crowd directly. Is that really what you want? To be ruled by whoever can win a fight? To have your futures decided by violence and fear?
She could see murmurs starting throughout the crowd, vampires turning to each other and having whispered conversations.
You've all lived for decades or centuries, Elena continued. You've seen the rise and fall of human civilizations.
You've watched us grow from primitive tribes to spacefaring societies.
And, do you know what the most successful human societies have in common?
Elena paused, letting the question hang in the air. They're the ones where power comes from the consent of the governed. Where leaders are chosen not because they're the strongest, but because they're the wisest, the most just, the most capable of inspiring others to be their best selves.
Humans are weak, Marcus spat. Their democracies fail. Their leaders betray them. Yes, Elena agreed. Humans make mistakes. But we also learn from them. We grow. We change.
And that's something immortal societies often struggle with.
Elena turned to face the full crowd again. You could choose to be ruled by fear and violence.
You could choose leaders based on who can spill the most blood.
But what kind of society would that create? What kind of future would you be building for yourselves?
She paused, meeting the eyes of several vampires in the crowd.
Or you could choose something different.
You could choose to be ruled by wisdom, by justice, by the kind of strength that builds rather than destroys. You could choose leaders who see your potential rather than just your power.
Elena could see that her words were having an effect.
The murmurs had grown louder, and she could see vampires nodding in agreement. This is ridiculous, Marcus said angrily. You're asking vampires to betray their very nature.
No, Elena said firmly. I'm asking vampires to evolve beyond their nature. To become something greater than what they've always been. Adrian stepped forward to stand beside Elena. The choice is yours, he said to the assembled crowd. Follow Marcus, and continue as we have for centuries. Follow Elena and me, and help us build something new. For a long moment, the courtyard was silent except for the crackling of torches. Then, Lady Catherine stepped forward.
I choose evolution, she said clearly.
I choose the future over the past. Victor moved to stand beside Lady Catherine. I choose wisdom over violence. Isabel joined them. I choose hope over fear.
One by one, vampires began moving to stand behind Elena and Adrian. Not all of them. Elena could see that perhaps a third of the crowd remained where they were, uncertain or loyal to Marcus's vision.
But it was enough.
When the movement finally stopped, Elena found herself standing before a clear majority of the vampire court. Marcus looked around at the vampires who had chosen to follow Elena, his expression shifting from anger to something that might have been respect.
Impressive, he said finally. I underestimated you. Does this mean you accept the results? Elena asked.
Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its mocking tone.
I accept that you have earned the right to try, he said.
But, know this, human queen, if you fail, if your ideals prove too weak for the realities of vampire society, I will be here to remind everyone why the old ways existed.
I wouldn't expect anything less, Elena said. Marcus nodded curtly, then turned and walked away.
About half of the vampires who hadn't chosen sides followed him, while the others approached Elena with expressions of curiosity and cautious optimism.
Your Majesty, Lady Catherine said with a bow, where do we begin? Elena looked around at the faces of the vampires who had chosen to follow her.
They were looking at her expectantly, waiting for her to prove that her vision of vampire society could actually work.
We begin, Elena said, by keeping our promises. Tomorrow morning, I want to meet with representatives from every major vampire faction. We're going to work together to find alternatives to hunting innocent humans. And, if some refuse to participate? Victor asked. Then, we'll find ways to incentivize cooperation, Elena said.
But, we start with the assumption that most vampires want to be better than they've been allowed to be. Adrian smiled at her, and Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the torches.
What about tonight? Isabel asked. How do we celebrate this victory? Elena looked up at Adrian, then, back at the assembled vampires. Tonight, we celebrate by being honest about what lies ahead. Change is hard. Challenging centuries of tradition will be harder still.
But, if we're committed to doing this together, then, we can build something worth celebrating.
The crowd began to disperse, vampires talking excitedly among themselves about the changes that might be coming.
Elena found herself alone with Adrian in the courtyard, the torchlight painting everything in warm golden hues.
No regrets? Adrian asked quietly.
Elena thought about the question seriously. She was married to a vampire king. She had just challenged the fundamental structure of supernatural society. She had committed herself to trying to reform creatures who had been killers for centuries. No regrets, she said finally. Though I think the real work is just beginning. Adrian reached into his coat and withdrew a small wooden box, different from the one Marcus had presented. Speaking of which, he said, I have something for you.
Elena looked at the box with suspicion. Please tell me it's not more blood. Adrian laughed, and the sound transformed his entire face.
No blood, he promised.
This is my real wedding gift to you.
Elena opened the box and found a simple silver key inside. It was warm to the touch and seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight.
What does it open? Elena asked.
The treasury, Adrian said.
Complete access to 8 centuries of accumulated wealth.
Gold, jewels, artwork, property holdings across multiple countries.
All of it is now yours to use as you see fit.
Elena stared at the key, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering her.
You're giving me control of the vampire kingdom's entire fortune?
I'm giving you the resources you'll need to make your vision a reality, Adrian corrected. If you're going to convince vampires to change their hunting habits, you'll need to be able to offer them something better. If you're going to build new institutions and new traditions, you'll need funding. If you're going to protect humans while also providing for vampire needs, you'll need more resources than any individual vampire possesses.
Elena closed the box and looked up at Adrian. This is about more than just money, isn't it?
Yes, Adrian said.
This is about trust.
I'm trusting you with not just my wealth, but with the power to reshape everything I've built over the past 8 centuries.
And what if I make mistakes?
Then, we'll learn from them and do better next time, Adrian said.
That's what you said about human societies, isn't it? They make mistakes, but they learn and grow?
Elena smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time since this whole adventure began.
Yes, that's what I said. Then, let's start learning and growing together.
Elena took Adrian's hand and looked up at the stars barely visible above the torch smoke. Somewhere out there, her family was probably worrying about her. Somewhere out there, humans were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that their relationship with the supernatural world was about to change dramatically.
And, here, in this ancient castle courtyard, a 19-year-old girl and an 800-year-old vampire king were planning to revolutionize immortal society.
Adrian, Elena said suddenly.
Yes? Thank you.
For what?
For giving me a choice.
For trusting me with real power.
For letting me be more than just a pawn in someone else's game.
Adrian brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently.
Thank you for choosing to stay.
For seeing possibilities instead of just problems.
For believing that even monsters can become something better.
Elena looked around the courtyard one more time, thinking about all the work that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opponents, and new questions about whether her idealistic plans could survive contact with reality. But tonight, she had proven that a human girl could win the loyalty of vampires not through fear or violence, but through vision and hope. She had shown that even ancient traditions could be questioned and changed. Most importantly, she had discovered that sometimes the most terrifying thing that can happen to you turns out to be the beginning of exactly the life you were meant to live. Elena Martinez, the 19-year-old queen of the vampires, was ready to begin building a better world. One that no longer required innocent blood to sustain it, but instead thrived on the kind of strength that could only come from choosing to be better than your nature demanded. The kingdom had indeed been silenced by Adrian's true wedding gift, not just the key and the wealth it represented, but the gift of real partnership, real power, and real possibility for change.
And Elena had proven herself worthy of all three.